Good evening, everyone. You're in the right place at the right time. This is Coast to Coast AM, blasting out of the Mojave Desert like a Scirocco, blazing across the land, slamming into your radio like a supercharged nanoparticle of unobtainium. Greetings to all of you from the boldest, bawdiest, most outrageous city in the world, the planetary capital of sun, fun, sin, sex, and secrets, my not-so-humble hometown, Las Vegas, Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves, and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophonous cavalcade of conversation. Thanks for spending some time with us tonight. I'm glad to be with you on a rare Saturday night, rare for me anyway, and I'm hoping you can stay up late with us tonight, sleep in tomorrow. I think we got some pretty good stuff on tap. We will explore some of the most profound experiences that humans can have, events that come out of nowhere, that blindside us, events which we do not seek or want, but which change us forever. These experiences are so strange, so outside the bounds of what we understand about our world, that many mainstream scientists would be happy to dismiss them altogether as like a mental aberration or psychoses of one kind or another, all in our heads. But if you think of the people who've been through these things, and if you look at the surrounding circumstances and give it a fair shake, a fair examination, it becomes pretty clear that something really did happen to them, does happen, is happening, something otherworldly, outside the normal range of our lives. Tonight we explore two different mysteries, two sets of circumstances with different explanations, though I suspect they are somehow related, tied together on some invisible level that we don't quite understand. So come along with us tonight as we venture out on a spiritual safari, a trek into the unknown. And I fully expect to learn a few things I haven't heard before and think the same might be true for you. First up, we'll have an Army colonel and combat nurse who started hearing strange tales from wounded combat soldiers back during the Vietnam conflict. Those stories, remarkably consistent, as told by now thousands of people, strongly suggest there is something beyond this life, that we exist independently of our physical bodies. The near-death experience, as they are now known, changed the course of Diane Corcoran's life. And the stories she will share with us tonight just might change the course of yours. Dr. Corcoran is no longer active service military, but she is still working with the armed forces, trying to create programs to help servicemen and women who've had their own NDEs, near-death experiences. She joins us in just a few minutes, and I'm really looking forward to welcoming her to the program for the first time. And then an entirely different kind of experience, but similar in subtle ways. The phenomenon known as alien abductions burst onto the scene a couple of decades ago. And as you all know, for years they were the staple of tabloid news programs, as well as serious scientific conferences here and there. But it seems like we don't hear much about them anymore, not in mainstream media anyway, but they still happen. Thousands of people report them every year, are trying to grapple with the consequences of these experiences. For those involved, they are life-changing events affecting not only the experiencers, but everyone around them. Scientists, as I mentioned before, would probably like the whole thing to just dry up and go away, but it won't. One of the reasons that I became interested and stayed interested in what you'd call esoteric subjects like this is because of a man named Dr. Edgar Mitchell. He was the sixth man to walk on the moon, might have been fifth, I think it's sixth man to walk on the moon, an explorer in every sense of the word. And he's had the courage over the last few decades to put his considerable reputation on the line in looking at and exploring other cutting-edge frontier sciences. He's helped found a couple of scientific organizations devoted to exploring subjects that more timid minds are unwilling to tackle and which debunkers dismiss kind of with the wave of their hands. Tonight, we will look into FREE, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. One of the co-founders has had these remarkable experiences for himself. He's a tax attorney, an IRS employee, Rey Hernandez, making his first appearance on Coast. Then in hour two, the second, we will be joined by another of the co-founders of this program. Second half of the program, returning to Coast, will be two of the world's foremost researchers into the contactee experience. Mary Rodwell joining us from down under, her home in Australia, and with her will be psychologist Dr. Jon Klimo, a pioneer in the scientific investigation of this kind of research, as well as consciousness studies and all sorts of other new paradigm disciplines. We'll save time for you to chime in, maybe share some of your experiences with us in the last hour of the program tonight, perhaps ask our panelists for some advice and insight. And I really look forward to hearing from all of these guests tonight, so we'll be getting to that in just a moment. Webmaster Sean and I have put together our usual assortment of items and oddities culled from various obscure news sources around the world. We call it Knapp's News. You can find it on the Coast website. Among the stories posted tonight, a scary moment for astronauts on the ISS, a close encounter with space debris. Also, an update on everyone's favorite conspiracy, HAARP. Whatever happened to that strange array anyway? Some very strange tales. A guy in Argentina who says he shot an ET, and 2 Nevada motorists who think they were buzzed by a flying dinosaur. Those stories and a few other tasty tidbits. While you're on the website, check into how to become a Coast Insider. If you join, of course, it allows you to tap into a vast library of previous Coast programs, classics from years gone by, recent programs as well. You can listen anytime at your convenience on a variety of devices. You can listen as many times as you want. The cost is pennies a day. It's a really good deal. With that, let's do our duty, follow the steps, gird our loins, so to speak, get ready for our journey into the unknown. So bring in the dog and cat, put on a pot of joe, slide into those jammies and bunny slippers, plop yourself into that Barca lounger, dim the lights, and turn up that radio, because in a moment we begin. I'm George Knapp, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. I'm George Knapp. This is Coast to Coast. My first guest is Diane Corcoran, a registered nurse and a Ph.D. who is a retired Army colonel and president of the board of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. That's an international resource and support organization for people who've had NDEs, near-death experiences, or who want to understand and support friends and family members who've had them. Dr. Corcoran, thanks for being with us, and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Glad to be here, George.
Gosh, we were introduced by informally by a mutual friend, Dr. John Alexander, who I know is very supportive of the work. He said you've done some amazing stuff, and I can't wait to hear about it. The way I want to begin is how you became interested in this, because that's such a key part of your story. It was back during the Vietnam era. What started happening? What were the stories that you started hearing?
Back then, we had very critically injured soldiers, and particularly one night, a very young guy who had been an amputee and brought into the hospital near death called me over. He had surgery and was recovering, and said to me, "I really want to talk to you, but I'm very afraid you won't believe me." And he was intense. He was emotional. And, of course, it's in the middle of the night. I was a second lieutenant, new to the Army. And I said, I really want to hear what it is. And so he started telling me about when he was injured and he felt like he was coming out of his physical body. He could see the battlefield. He could see the spirits of other soldiers. He said he felt like he knew who was going to live and who was going to die, and felt like he was kind of swirling out into another world. And he started talking about this, was very emotional, asked me if I knew what this was about, and I said, I don't. I really don't understand it, but I believe it happened to you. And so he went on to describe it, and as we know now, it's very much like many other NDEs, and was my introduction. It was something I didn't know the name for at the time, nor did anybody, and I just kind of put it back in the brain And years later, it came up again, but that was my introduction.
So describe the scene, though. It's 1969, Vietnam. It's a pretty hairy situation. You're seeing a lot of injured, wounded soldiers.
Yes, we are. We're seeing many. I worked in pre-op recovery, so it was a constant flow of soldiers and people tragically wounded in near death, many of them. And, I'm a pretty brand new nurse. And in the heat of all of this, this was really sort of earth-shattering because I had never in my life heard anything like it. But I realized how emotional he was about it, and this was not a trivial event for him.
What was it about his story that sort of resonated with you? I know you said it's emotional, but I mean, in the time frame, this is before Dr. Raymond Moody had talked about NDEs or even come up with the term for them, right?
Right. That was in 75. But anybody that talks about going outside of their physical body and being able to look down upon the field and communicating, feel like he's communicating with a spirit form, I mean, that was pretty unusual to hear from anybody at that time.
So did you hear it from other soldiers in Vietnam, or did you not hear it again until later?
I really didn't hear it again until later in the 70s when I started taking care of other people, and then once in a while I would hear somebody about it, but we didn't have a name for it until the mid-70s when Raymond wrote his book, Life After Life.
And when do you remember reading that for the first time, and then it sort of clicked with you? Hey, that reminds me of the guy in Vietnam.
It did. I had actually been very intrigued with it. In the early 70s, I went to the University of Texas to get a PhD. I was still in the Army, and I started doing some reading about some of the religious, old reading, and there was remnants in the philosophical literature of stories like this, but it never really hit home until Raymond wrote his book.
You were commanded a hospital unit. I read part of your biography. That was pretty unusual, I would think, a female officer to command a hospital unit back in those days. And then you were chief nurse.
It was very exciting. I was the first Army nurse to ever officially command a hospital, so it was very exciting.
And you're chief nurse at the 86th Combat Support Hospital, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. That's a great position for you to be in. I would imagine, since you're a pioneer, in a sense, within the military at that time, is it risky for you to talk to colleagues about something as strange as this?
Well, I'm sure as when I initially started talking about this, because after a couple of issues like this and talking to people, I really felt it was a medical nursing responsibility to understand this phenomena so that we could support people. So I'm very sure early on my colleagues thought that I was a little crazy. They used to call me the deaf and dying lady. But I was adamant, and it's sort of like information is delivered when it's needed. When I would start talking about it, we had people in the hospital that would have this happen. And eventually I would have general officers calling me when they knew that I started talking about NDEs. And that's exactly why we're starting and hoping to set up something just for veterans and service members. At IANS, we've set up a email line just for them. It's called vethelp@iands.org, so that we can just address military people who have had NDEs. They're very hesitant to talk to other people. They're afraid, for many reasons, that their credibility will be questioned, that their benefits might not come through. And so IANS is really dedicating both our conference in September and all of this you can see on our website, really trying to get to the vets to be able to support them, talk to them. I will be doing a discussion group with veterans at the conference, and we've got scholarships and have offered veterans the ability to come and talk for the first time about their experiences.
There is a link to your organization on the Coast website. Any veterans out there, anyone who's interested in the topic can check out the link, and there's a lot of resources there. I wanted to ask you how your colleagues, I mean, you became sort of the go-to person when other medical professionals would hear sort of an NDE type experience, they would refer it to you or they'd ask you questions. How did the military establishment, how did the command structure react to it, and VA, for example, and what's their attitude today?
Well, while I was on active duty, interestingly enough, although I was very zealous about this, and I think some of my superiors thought I was a little strange, they knew that I was really dedicated to this. They knew I was a very good nurse and scientifically based, so there was some ability for them to say, okay, she's doing this, she believes it, and I got to be a colonel, so I guess there's something to be said for that. The Veterans Administration's a different story. I think that they don't really understand it very well. They have seemed to throw NDEers into PTSD groups, mainly because I don't think they really understand the phenomena. There are, of course, some people who do, but not a lot of people, and we've had a couple of people at our office come looking for information, and they were simply given drugs at the VA when they tried to tell their story and were told that they were having some kind of hallucinations. And thank God they got to us, and we were able to help them, and eventually they got back to work and off the drugs. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen at the Veterans Administration, and we have offered to do training and provide information, as I did on active duty. And we have tapes and all kinds of information that would allow them to train the trainer and get up to speed on this.
I wonder if this is the kind of thing that can be totally suppressed. Let's say there's a veteran who had the experience. He's talking to his VA doctor who thinks this guy's crazy. Let me just pound him full of drugs and it'll go away. Where people who are treated like that and it actually does go away, or it's suppressed, or does it always find a way to get out?
No, there are a certain percentage of people, many times people who have had NDEs as children, who don't remember an event, or they don't remember anything that happened to them after the event, but they do sometimes understand it from the after effects. They had an accident, they had some kind of a near drowning, electrocution, and then they started having different thoughts. They were feeling like they were a different person. They had more intuition. They had problems with loud noises or bright lights and some of the different after effects, and were able to work it backwards or through our help find out that actually they had an NDE. They just didn't remember the event. And I do think that's very difficult because that makes it even worse for veterans, particularly with TBIs. You see this traumatic brain injury. They had an accident and they had an injury, but don't remember an event, but have different kinds of things when they come home. They are just very different people, and this is an issue for them.
We're going to go to a break here in 30 seconds or so I don't have time to for you to respond to this question, but in the next segment, when we come back, I'm going to have you tell us some examples of how profoundly it has changed people. I imagine, like for back in that Vietnam era, these soldiers who might have it, it changes their view of violence and war so totally, and they can't be an effective soldier anymore. That causes a lot of problems for them. And the other part I want to explore is whether or not you have numbers, accurate numbers. Do we have any kind of a really handle on how many of these are out there? I'll tell you what, the music is telling us we need to take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Diane Corcoran about near-death experiences right after this on Coast to Coast AM. Judas Priest from 1982, You've Got Another Thing Coming. I don't know if you heard that song going out of the break, or into the break, rather. It was Blue Cheer, Summertime Blues. Figured that's a good song for July. We're talking with Diane Corcoran about the near-death experiences that she's investigated through her her work as a nurse with the military. When we come back, we're going to get into some specifics. How many of them are out there? And then some of the individual cases that have changed her view of reality and everything around it. Much more to come here on Coast to Coast AM. Diane Corcoran, let's talk about specific examples. Can you share with us, I don't know if you could use the names or not, but the specific kinds of cases that have sort of changed your view of the world as we know it?
One case that happened, and you can see how this would happen when you really understand the after effects. I was stationed in Germany. I got a call. By this time, I am a colonel, and lots of people know that I'm associated with near-death experiences and help in this arena. And I got a call from a commander, a dental commander, who told me that he was a near-death experiencer, but he also was a West Point graduate, and that he was really conflicted because he did not want to be able to punish people. He wanted to help them. He didn't know how to really deal with his responsibilities as a commander, as the Army sees it, and his after effects from the NDE, which made him more altruistic, more compassionate, really a kinder, gentler, generous person. And so he really wondered whether he could continue to do this.
Is there something for you to study? You hear these kinds of stories. People are obviously changed, but as a scientist, what can you study are there physical parameters of this that are measurable?
Well, there probably are when you look at some of the after effects. We would love to be able to measure some of this. We'd like to be able to get a better handle on NDEs in the military. We have no idea, other than we know that up to sometimes 40% of people who are injured or near death or have extenuating circumstances that you might find in the Army and injury have near-death experiences. So there are many things we could measure. There are many things we could study. If we could have the opportunity to do that, there certainly are a lot of things now coming out on consciousness and looking at this phenomena that wasn't looked at earlier. So we know there's millions of people that have had NDEs, but we would love to study the after effects and really look deeper into this.
Like physical effects, physical changes in them. Yes. I know in some of the stuff that you had written where they have problems with electrical things and computers, things of that sort.
Yes, electrical. They can't wear watches many times. They sometimes have a sensitivity to medication. They have temperatures that are lower than normal. And they, have problems with loud noises, bright lights, sounds. I once sat at a lunch table outside with 3 experiencers. We were at a conference, and an ambulance came by with the terrible sirens, and all 3 of them simultaneously put their hands up over their ears because it was painful even to listen to the sirens.
I know you had said that during the Vietnam era and maybe in other conflicts that you would talk to soldiers who come out of this thing. They can't be soldiers anymore. They just can't think about killing somebody. Is that right?
They have difficulty with that. And of course, in Vietnam, most everybody went home. We don't know the pain and isolation that soldiers are suffering from Iraq and Afghanistan because they had multiple tours where they were made to go back. We haven't really been able to get them to freely talk to us. That's why we're providing this new email line called vethelp@iands.org so that we can help veterans. They're so afraid to talk to anybody, and they feel very isolated, and on top of that, they have physical injuries, and many of them do have PTSD, and we think we could help them if they could just own their own experience, their NDE, which they've not had a lot of success in telling people and getting someone to listen and provide support. They don't need therapy. They need to own their own experience and get information and understand it better, not be in therapy for having had an NDE.
I can imagine that it would cause all kinds of family problems, sort of similar to PTSD or something, yes, where you can't really explain to your loved ones what's going on, and maybe you either try to suppress it or you tell them and they think you're crazy. I mean, I can see divorces, suicides, all kinds of things coming out of that.
That's exactly what happens. And imagine a child who has had an NDE and tries to tell a parent. I know several children that had NDEs, tried to tell their family. They said, don't make up stories, and they never talked about it again until they were adults. So they suffered through all these after effects in a school system that would not particularly be helpful. And I worry a great deal about children, veterans, and the elderly who are trying to deal with having had this exceptional experience and no one to talk to.
So kids come back. One of the characteristics that's reported in the literature, kids who have these experiences, they come back, when they have it, they're 6. When they come back, they're in essence 30.
That's very true. I actually have a nephew who's an experiencer that I identified very early. And it was amazing, his ability to talk and the vocabulary he had and the ideas and thoughts that he was able to talk about.
I know one of the things also that I had read was that they got your attention is that medical professionals in the service, the armed services, would resuscitate these wounded soldiers, people who are on the verge of dying. They bring them back, and the person who's just been saved is angry about it.
I think that's a phenomena that has happened frequently, and I really never understood it until I really thought about it from the perspective of a near-death experiencer. They go up, they feel like they've gone to heaven, they're in this loving, wonderful place. They don't want to come back. They're seeing their deceased loved ones, and they are just willing to stay there. And we, of course, it's not we, but some power greater than us, but we are perceived to be the ones that pull them back into their painful bodies. And there we are very feeling proud of ourselves, and they're furious with us.
I remember
understandably so.
I remember the last time I talked to Dr. Raymond Moody. He told me about his work researching cases where there's more than one person experiences the NDE, that people, loved ones who are around the person who is dying, are sort of sucked into it and go along the way. And those are pretty profound cases. I wonder if you've had anything like that, or any cases where someone is outside their body and they see something that they should not have been able to see. And it's verifiable afterward.
We hear a lot about that. I have not personally experienced what Dr. Moody's talking about, but I know that certainly these exist. I have talked to some children and young adults who talked about meeting family members. And, of course, as children, they don't have any preconceptions about this. They met family members. I remember this one little boy who said that he had met his grandfather who had died in a fire in England. And he went on to talk a little bit about that. And when he was resuscitated, and I talked to his parents about this, of course, he was young. I don't remember, 4 or 5 or 6, around there. He'd never, ever been anywhere. And they didn't really have a great deal of information about the great-grandfather and where he lived, etc. But I told the mother about this, and she actually did some research, and everything he said was true. The names, the situation, who was killed in, he had never been off a city block. And we've heard many, many cases like this from people contacting loved ones and other folks on the other side. So it happens pretty frequently. It's one of those really interesting after effects and characteristics that happen during the experience.
So what does it tell us ultimately about life after life, about humans, souls, what comes next? What does it say?
Well, it certainly is saying that this is not the end, that there is something that goes on after one dies, and another life, another place, and that people exist there. They're happy. They're in a place that apparently is surrounded by love and understanding, and they're active and enjoy a different kind of life, but life goes on after we physically die.
How do you deal with the scientists who want this to go away, and they say, "Oh yeah, I've figured it out. It's what happens when you're dying and the brain is cut off of oxygen, then you see a light in a tunnel, and that explains the whole thing." I mean, is there a physical explanation that can account for the kinds of things that you're hearing?
I don't think there's a physical explanation that accounts for all the characteristics for an NDE. We certainly have people, physicians and some scientists, that will say, I poked around this area of the brain and was able to make people feel like they were out of their body, which having out-of-body effects is one attribute that happens to NDEs. Or other things, but nobody can account for all the characteristics of the NDE or the after effects. And I think science isn't there yet. Will it be? Maybe, but we've got to look at things in a different light. Not all things are able to be explained through pure science. Many emotional things, love, forgiveness, some of those you can measure certain aspects of it, but you can't prove some of these things. And I think one day we'll find something that will be able to hook all these after effects and characteristics up and be able to give us a good, rational explanation that does touch into science, but we're not there yet.
Some of the people who come back, you mentioned about how it changes them, physical changes, emotional changes, but there are even more profound changes that have been explored on this program, psychic abilities. Joe McMoneagle comes to mind. He had, I think, 2 NDEs and then came back with this ability. We call it remote viewing. He's probably the most celebrated, most accomplished remote viewer in the history of that controversial program. But I don't know if you know Joe McMoneagle, but
yes, I do, yes.
What do you make of that, coming back with a gift like that? Is that maybe sort of the reason it happens, or?
We can't explain that. We have a surgeon who was electrocuted and came back with the ability to write and compose and play classical music. You know, you just can't explain some of it. There are several people that have demonstrated psychic ability, many with healing ability. And no, I can't give you an explanation for that, but I certainly have seen it, experienced it, and it's very real. And I think we have to celebrate it and hope one day we'll get better understanding about it.
I think I read that you know a lady who, when she walks into a room, the lights react to her presence?
Well, I have had a conversation, actually. Phyllis Atwater, PMH Atwater, has discussed electrical connectivity with people at a great length. I did talk to a reporter one time who told me how he and his son and his wife walked around the neighborhood every night, and he was doing a story on me on NDEs, and I was talking about some of the after effects. And the more he talked about his son, the more I realized that his son sounded very much like a young NDEer. And he was talking about when they walked in the neighborhood that the street lights would flash. And then I asked him, I said, well, do they flash when just you and your wife walk around, or is it only when your son walks with you? And as he thought about it, he said, no, it's only when my son walks with me. But you hear lots of NDEers who can't wear watches because the batteries just die. You get a new battery, it's gone. You get one the next day, it's gone. They have to find either solar power or movement-powered watches.
So tell me, if there are people listening to this program who are parents of kids like that, or young people who think they may have had an experience at some point, or veterans who have been suppressing these memories and trying to deal with it on their own, what do they do? What kinds of resources are available to help them?
I think the most important thing they can do is call us, write to us. For the veterans, we've got the vet help at iands.org. They can look on our website. We answer all the emails. We will talk to them. We will give them articles. We can give them a place to go to. We have groups all around the country and that support people that are trying to understand this. They can come to our conference in San Antonio, which is the 3rd through the 6th of September at the Marriott on the River in San Antonio. You can get the details from our website. And we are going to have all kinds of discussion groups for them to really get a lot of information. Most new experiencers, once they come to one of our conferences, feel like they have really come home because they've not been understood, and here they come to some place where everybody understands what an NDE is. They're just there to get support, to get help, to get loved, and be able to express their opinion with nobody to do anything except accept it.
I would think the most important threshold there is the idea of realizing that you're not alone in this. A lot of people have been through it, and you're not alone.
I think that's the most devastating part for people. I'm going to be in a discussion group with a gentleman that I met last year at my Vietnam reunion. And Michael was a chopper pilot. He was shot down in Vietnam. He was taken to the hospital that I worked at, but prior to me being there. And he had the back of his head shot off. And he had this incredible NDE where he saw a friend of his that had died earlier. He saw a sergeant, and he's telling me this at the reunion. And as he describes this, I said, Michael, this is a near-death experience. Have you ever written this down? Have you talked to people? He said, I tried to talk to the doctors, but nobody wanted to hear about it. And so I really haven't said much about it. So we had had him write it, actually, and it'll be in the next issue of Vital Signs, and he will be at the conference. After 40 years, he's finally going to get a chance to talk about it. The isolation for children would be more devastating. And for anybody, I've talked to many people who were childhood experiencers but never really talked about it because they didn't have any accepting ears at the time.
Dr. Diane Corcoran, can't thank you enough. This is fascinating stuff. I'd encourage people who have listened to check out the website. We got a link on our website. And if you're in Texas and San Antonio in early September, you're welcome at the conference. Thank you, Diane. Appreciate it. 9 take us into the break here on Coast to Coast AM. Much more to come. A big, powerful number this is. It first came out in the 1990s. It's called Let Me Entertain You, but it's still the song that Robbie Williams, who's a friend of this program, still the song that he uses to open most of his concerts. He is on a worldwide tour right now and probably listening to this program at some point. We're shifting gears just a little bit now. Anyone who listens to this program on a regular basis is familiar with the alien abduction scenario. The stories have been told so many times on this program and others. It's a theme that first burst into the public consciousness a couple of decades ago when the late, great Bud Hopkins wrote about it. His books became bestsellers, classics in the genre. And then it really exploded when Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, sort of forever etched that image of a bug-eyed alien into our collective consciousness. It was a very intense time for that subject, alien abductions. Ufology, of course, didn't know what to make of it. There was a lot of resistance, I think, to old-school nuts-and-bolts saucer guys, but some very brave, stalwart academics forged ahead with it anyway. Dr. David Jacobs, for one, and especially Dr. Jon Mack, the late Dr. Jon Mack of Harvard Medical School. He put his professional reputation, his career, his tenure all on the line by having the courage to go ahead and interview dozens of experiencers and then wrote about it. He rejected the idea that it was all in their heads, much to the consternation of his colleagues at Harvard, and that helped change everything. But it feels like we don't hear much about it anymore, certainly not in the mainstream news, my line of work. They don't have news stories in the evenings about alien abductions. So does that mean it's gone away, dwindled into nothing, that maybe the visitors have lost interest in us? Hardly. An organization known as FREE, co-founded by a legendary scientist and astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, is not only studying the phenomena, but it's offering help to those who are still grappling with this strange and frightening series of events. In some cases, as we've heard on this program, these experiences last a lifetime. It happens over and over to some people and affects different people in different ways, but more often than not, affecting them in demonstrable and profound ways. Coming up, someone who can tell us firsthand what this experience is like, not only for himself, but for his family members. They've seen it too. They've been through it with him. Rey Hernandez will tell us about his strange journey and about the organization known as FREE and the work it is doing. That's in just a moment here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. Rey Hernandez is an experiencer and a co-founder of FREE, as I mentioned, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. He has a varied background, pretty interesting. Director of the Center for a Sustainable Urban Environment at the City University of New York, Director of the Office of Community Environmental Planning for the City of New York. He's attended Rutgers College, Cornell University, was a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley, and this is the part that I know is a first for Coast to Coast. He's a tax attorney with the IRS. Rey Hernandez, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knapp.
Can you put in a good word for me with the IRS?
Unless you die with more than $5 million of net assets, then I won't even touch you. I deal with estate taxes.
I think I'm safe. Let's start this. Before we talk about the organization FREE itself, I was reading the account of what you have been through. Man, it's pretty amazing. Yours started, though, late in your life. I mean, it doesn't start as a child as it does for a lot of people. At what point did this series of experiences start? Why don't you walk us through it?
Surely. It started March the 4th, 2012. So it's approximately a little bit over 3 years ago. And before that date, I had no interest whatsoever in UFOs, ETs, the paranormal, nothing of that sort. I was just a normal person leading a normal life. And then what had happened, I'll try to summarize. Basically, our dog was 16 years old, very, very sick, walking like an old lady, and had a stroke. And then my wife was up all night praying for the dog, hoping for a miracle. She's from Mexico. And then early in the morning, when we woke up, the dog was still paralyzed. And so she carried the dog down the stairs to see if she can go to the bathroom. And when she got down to the bottom of the stairs, she saw like a little mini craft inside our living room. And then she knelt down and started praying, and then these lights started blinking on inside that little craft, and it was like the ship has an upside down U. So she ran. She was calling me, and I was ignoring her. And she ran upstairs and pulled me down. So that I walked in front of her, and then when she got to the bottom of the stairs, and I was right next to her, she disappeared. And then I immediately looked in the corner of the room, and I saw a floating plasma being. I call it a being because it controlled my mind and put me to sleep. And then I basically waved my hand at it. I said, BS. I then walked
You said
upstairs.
what? What'd you say?
I waved my hand at it, like saying, this is nothing, it's BS.
Oh.
Which is not normal, it's not logical, but I'm just explaining exactly what happened.
Hold on a second. Slow down for a second. Describe what this thing looks like.
What I saw was different from what my wife saw. What I saw was an object that was translucent. It looked like pure plasma energy, multicolored inside. The shape was rectangular in shape, approximately 2 to 3 feet wide by 1.5 feet in height. And but it didn't have any external edges because it wasn't solid. It was translucent. It was pure energy.
What did she see? How did she see it?
She saw something differently. She saw a metallic object that was sort of an upside down U, which was roughly 2 feet wide by 3 feet in height, and it had 2 green lights in the middle. And then the reason for these discrepancies was that right in front of me, she disappeared. And then I went upstairs, and this thing put me to sleep. I went to sleep, and then when I woke up, it was like a hypnotist snaps the fingers and says, okay, kid, wake up. And I woke up, and I was fully conscious, unlike before. And then I ran downstairs because I realized, I remembered what I had seen. And then when I got downstairs, my wife was dancing around the floor in Spanish saying, the angels cured her, the angels cured her. And the dog was now running around like a little teenager, jumping up and down and fully healed. And at that point, I was like, what the hell just happened? I got hit in the head by a 2x4. And then there was mass confusion with my wife and I, because to her, I had never gone upstairs. To me, I was right behind her, and then when she looked down at the floor, the dog was cured, and she was celebrating.
So you don't have any UFO books. You don't have it. You're not going to UFO flying saucer conferences. Your wife isn't interested in this. She sees it as a religious apparition. You're not a religious guy, though, either, are you?
I wasn't then at all. I'm very, very spiritual because of a lot of experiences that happened. But before then, I had no concept. Maybe I watched an Ancient Alien show late at night when I couldn't get to sleep, but no conception at all of UFOs or of the paranormal. And my wife neither.
So tell me this: after the immediate that immediate event, how are you two dealing with it? When the next morning at breakfast or something, what are you saying to each other? What the heck was that? How are you trying to explain it to each other?
Well, that's exactly what we were trying to do. It was total confusion. I didn't even know this concept of missing time. I realized it much, much later on. It was just massive confusion because she was insisting that she didn't see that plasma energy being, and I didn't see what she had seen. And then she didn't remember me going upstairs and going to bed. And as far as she knew, I'd stayed there the whole time with her. So it was massive confusion. Now, what happened afterwards, that she had numerous encounters seeing crafts afterwards. One time it was very, very close. There was a huge craft as the size of a football stadium that she saw. She then went to Mexico, and there, with her family members, she had another encounter where everyone in the two-car caravan saw a huge craft descend from the sky, beam the blue light in front of the lead car, then descended and took off. And she had two other experiences in Mexico. And meanwhile, for the next 6 months, I signed up immediately for MUFON once I did some research on the internet, trying to get some answers, but I never did get any answers. And I was just basically reading UFO books afterwards, and for the next 6 months, and going to the internet, and all it did is just confuse me. Until I had my own sighting of a huge, gigantic craft that I called down. I playfully did it without even thinking of it.
How long? Okay, how long after the initial experience did this happen?
That was in August, late August of 2012, and that was witnessed by my daughter and 3 other friends. And I did report that event to MUFON.
And so you're doing sort of playfully thinking, boy, that was really an interesting experience. Let's do that again. And you sort of mentally reach out to them, or what?
Well, what happened was that I had a friend of mine who had all these parking tickets. And so I said, look, give me all those tickets. I'll do a motion to consolidate them, and you go to court. It's just one time. So he called me up. He says, Ray, I got all the tickets. And I said, okay, I'll wait for you outside. So I'm waiting outside, and then I'm thinking of the huge craft that my wife saw, because she said it's between this tree and that tree, and it's like 2 blocks away or 3 blocks away, so it's a huge craft. And then I immediately thought of this guy, Prophet Yahweh, who I'd seen on YouTube the day before, and during the middle of the day, he was filming these crafts that he was calling down, but it was like a little tiny speck. So while I'm waiting for my friend at 9 o'clock at night, I said, what the hell, let me try it. So then I tried calling down a craft, but I wasn't serious. It was just, okay, let me try. And then 15 minutes later, this huge craft the size of a football stadium appeared right on top of my neighbor's roof, like 5 feet from the roof. And then I heard a voice, which is the voice of my daughter, saying, Daddy, you and Mommy have seen UFOs. Next time you guys see a UFO, you call me. All right, Daddy? Don't forget. So without even thinking, I go to my window, I start calling down my daughter, because in my mind, she wants to see a UFO. And so she opens up the window. I tell her to run outside. There's a UFO. And she runs outside. Now you got 2 people, watching this huge thing, literally 30 feet from you. And then about 15 minutes later, my friend comes, not by himself, but with his wife and his 17-year-old daughter. And since that day, it's just been many, many experiences, mainly paranormal experiences.
Well, we'll cover some of those, but I mean, did you think about grabbing a camera while this thing was hovering over the neighbor's house?
Well, everyone had a camera except my 10-year-old daughter. What people don't realize with these types of encounters is that your mind is completely controlled by these entities. For example, the neighbor under the house, they flicked the light on, right? They turned the light and they saw 5 people looking straight up at them. The normal thing to do would be to run over, knock on his door and say, Pablo, get the hell out. Look what's on top of your house. No one did that. My friends only stayed for 10 minutes. Then they said, okay, we got things to do. That's normal. That's not normal. You're watching a once-in-a-lifetime event, and all of a sudden you got to run, And I didn't even question them leaving. It was like, okay, don't worry about that paper I'm going to do. We'll talk tomorrow. And then later on, I felt that mosquitoes were attacking me. And then I grabbed my daughter and I said, come on, let's go inside. These mosquitoes are killing me. Meanwhile, this huge football stadium craft is literally 30 feet away from me and is still glowing with all these lights. And once I got inside, my daughter goes to me, Daddy, there were no mosquitoes outside. And then I ran and I woke up basically. I was in a comatose state kind of, where you're like half conscious and you don't realize what was happening. Then I fully woke up, just like when I was in my bed. I snapped out of it and I said, oh my God, what just happened? And then I ran, grabbed my camera, my video. I ran out and nothing was there. So that's what a lot of people don't understand of why you don't take pictures, why don't you act rationally, is because your mind is under control. while you're having this contact.
So I wonder if that thing was physically there or not, or it was just projected into each of your minds.
Well, we don't know. All I know is that there was 5 people that saw that same craft, and we all made drawings afterwards, and it was pretty much the same drawing, just different conceptualizations of it. But it was a semi-translucent, made up initially of thousands and thousands of oblong streaks of light, which formed the whole shell of the craft, and there was white plasma in the middle of this craft. It was huge. It went back like maybe 600 meters, about 100 meters in height. And then it changed its appearances because my friends were like trying to make up all these silly scenarios of what it might be. So in my head, I was like, well, you better come up with something different because they don't believe you. And all of a sudden, immediately, the lights changed. And it was all thousands and thousands of stars the size of 10 times the size of Venus that were blinking on and off, on and off, on and off in a fraction of a second. So it's like they're reading your minds and they're acting accordingly.
In the days afterward, did you talk at length with your neighbors? Wow, that was really cool, and try to come to grips with it.
I was so embarrassed because when you have an experience like this, you don't even tell your friends. You don't tell anyone because they'll think you're crazy. Even with the incident of my dog, I didn't tell anyone. Slowly, little by little, I started telling folks. For example, there's a neighbor which lives very, very close to this house where we live, and the house where we saw that crack. That's right next door to our house. And lo and behold, like a year later, I asked her, I told her what had happened, and then I found out that her entire family has had contact experiences. And so the more people you ask, the more you find out that these types of experiences, not only that, but near-death experiences. I think near-death experiences are just as common as contact experiences, because now I'm talking to many people now, just out of the blue, asking them questions, and the responses are just fascinating because people are coming out of the woodwork with these types of experiences.
We'll come back to the possible connection to NDEs. Let me ask about the dog. You said this dog was ready to die, and then suddenly it has this encounter, and it's jumping around like a puppy. How long did that last?
It lasted almost an entire year. She declined the last 2 weeks, but beforehand she was taking diuretics to emit the excess water in her body. She was taking actually Viagra for her heart. And she was walking like an old lady on crutches, like, really struggling to walk. And then a couple of weeks later, we brought her to the vet. Dr. Phil Cruz. Anybody could look him up. He knows the whole story. And he examined her, and he says, like, what happened to her, And we didn't tell him at that time. And he checked her out, and then we weaned her off the medicines, and then he said, look, she doesn't need to take the medicine. She's perfectly healthy. I don't know what happened, And then a year later, we told him. And then he just thought that we were nuts, But we did tell him eventually.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you're sort of out of the UFO closet here now. You work at the IRS. Have you had your boss or something call you in and say, what's the deal on this?
Oh, I spoke to him about it. I told him. And he told me a paranormal experience that he had it's about 2 years ago. And it dealt with his brother who had deceased. I won't go into the details because it's of a personal nature. But he knows about it. And he knows that paranormal experiences exist because of that. And I've told other attorneys in our group, and they just they have a hard time, reasoning this because I've had outstanding valuations with the IRS for many years now, which is the highest rating my supervisor could give. And I'm seen as I train the new employees, complicated tax matters. I go and do one-on-one assistance with other attorneys. So people look at me like, this guy's really gone off the deep end now, But I don't care because it's real, and humanity needs to know that this phenomenon exists. And not only myself, I've spoken now with over 6 doctors that have had these encounters. I won't even count how many PhD psychologists, We have 5 physicists in free, numerous professionals, but most of them are still hiding in the closet. And I think it's important for people to speak out about it and start an experiential liberation movement.
All right, Rey Hernandez, we're going to take a break here in a moment. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the other paranormal experiences, including one involving the dead sister of your wife. It's summertime. The Beach Boys are mandatory, I would think. Sail On Sailor from 1973. We'll be back with more right after this. Don McLean, as you know, his big hit, we all know the words to it, of course. This song, though, is his masterpiece. It's called Vincent, about the life of painter Vincent van Gogh. We're talking with Rey Hernandez. He's one of the co-founders of an organization known as Free. And when we come back, we pick up the tale that he's telling about this, a whole series of really weird experiences that led him to try to study and understand these various phenomena and to seek out how they might all be connected. Much more to come here on Coast to Coast AM. Rey Hernandez, so you have this experience of this odd object that's floating around in your house. It does something to your dog. You and your wife both see it. Then you, your wife, your daughter, and your neighbors all see this giant thing floating over the neighbor's house. But that's just the beginning of stuff that happens to you. Then a whole range of things happen. Let's start with the wife's dead sister.
Well, I don't want to be spending a lot of time on my personal experiences because we have a lot to talk about free. But basically, that was the only experience that I was aware of that happened before the contact that we had in our living room, and that was 2 years before our experiences. No, not 2 years. It was maybe like 5 years beforehand. My wife's sister had died, and basically her soul entered my wife.
And how do you know it was her?
Well, it's a lengthy story.
Well, actually, Rey, you know, we've got 2 hours to talk about free, okay. And in the next 2 hours, I'm going to talk all about free. So I'm kind of hoping that you're going to help us set the table for the kinds of people whose experiences are explored by the organization.
What happened was that was all I did for 18 hours straight afterwards, after that experience, was to read books on near-death experiences and consciousness studies. I didn't go to the internet. I didn't watch TV. I didn't have TV at that time. I didn't socialize. All I did was just read those books. I don't know why. Okay, and then the result of it was for 3 days in a row, the first 3 people I ever talked to about NDEs. The first one was my daughter's pediatrician, Dr. Herrera here in Miami. She told me about her NDE. That was the very first person. And then the second person, at a church dinner, this person named Max, then he told me about his NDE. And then the third day, this is 3 days in a row, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, December 21st, December 22nd, and December 23rd, 2012. Then the last one was my own father. And then that's when I finally realized that this was all a setup job, because what are the statistical probabilities of the very first 3 people you ever talked to about near-death experiences? 3 days in a row, each of them have had a near-death experience. And that occurred after you were basically like a crazy man reading 12 to 18 hours a day, all these books on near-death experiences and consciousness studies. And that was my first of these paranormal experiences that began.
So these things happen to you and your family. You start reading everything you can, but you're also casting sort of a wide net. You're talking to other people about it. You start interacting with other folks who have a variety of experiences. Among them is an MRI radiological technician at a hospital in Miami.
Correct. Up to that point, I had not spoken with anyone about my experiences. The first person was the pediatrician. That was on a Friday. The second person was Max, who works as an MRI and radiologist. And then he told me about his near-death experiences of his mother, and he had never spoken to anybody before about that experience. And then the third day was my own father. And so it's these types of experiences that I had very, very frequently. It was after that series, those 3 days, then I started to ask other people. because if it happened to these three people, my daughter's pediatrician, this guy that I've known, my wife knew his wife, but I never met the fellow. I met him at the church dinner, and subsequently he's become a good friend of mine. And then my own father. And so after I realized that, I said, this thing must be more common. It's just people are not talking about it. And then I've met tons of people that have had NDEs, and tons of people that have had UFO-related contact experiences, just in Miami.
So how does this end up with you and Free being associated with each other? How did you make that connection?
Well, what had happened was, and again, this is another crazy experience, quote unquote. One day in May in 2013 now, I was driving down the interstate going in the middle of a traffic jam to go to downtown Miami. And then I got my first ever, what I call a download, an ET telegram, which is a voice coming into my head. And then there was like a video that I saw associated with it. And basically it told me I have to tell humanity of the relationship between ETs, the spirit world, and consciousness, quantum physics. And then the video was that I was inside a spinning wheel. And then that same day, and you could interview Mary about it later on when you talk to her, she got an email that I had sent her 7 months beforehand, but she got it that same day that I got that download. And she said, "Dear Ray, I apologize for responding to this email 7 months late, but it just popped up on my screen." And then that was the first time I ever talked to someone outside of this other experiencer, who was the only one that I'd been talking to at that time, about what had happened to me, a researcher, outside of the person from MUFON. But that was just one day listening to a couple of our experiences. But by then I had tons of experiences. And then the very next day, I got a phone call from Dr. Rudy Shields. And Rudy's now our executive director of Free. And Rudy is an emeritus professor of astrophysics at Harvard. And so he called me. I didn't even remember who this guy was. I know now that Mary had mentioned it to him. So then he tried to tell me that my download that I got, where all the various modalities that I had in that picture that was inside that wheel, all the different ways that people can have contact with non-human intelligent beings, through near-death experiences, through remote viewing, through out-of-body experiences, through mystical meditation, through hallucinogens, et cetera, et cetera. All these different ways where people are having contact with non-human intelligent beings. So what he told me was that that's the quantum hologram that I was experiencing, and he and Dr. Edgar Mitchell were adherents to it and early proponents of that quantum hologram theory of physics and consciousness, and that explains that all the various modalities of contact experiences are all interrelated. So what he told me was that my download was 100% correct, according to the latest advanced theories of physics. And then he gave me a telephone number. He said, "Write this down," and I wrote it down. He says, "That's the telephone number of my mentor." And his mentor was Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And he says, "I'm going to call Edgar, and I'm going to tell him what just happened. I'm going to send him an email. So it's important for you to give him a call as well." And Rudy encouraged me to implement that download that I got, which was to tell humanity of the relationship between these ETs and the spirit world and quantum physics consciousness. He says, to do an organization to spread that. I told him, I have no idea what I'm going to do. They didn't tell me to do that. They didn't tell me to form an organization. He says, "Don't worry. It'll come to you once you figure it out." So then that same afternoon I called Edgar Mitchell, which I hadn't even, spoken with him before. And then he invited me to his house because Rudy had contacted him. And so the next day I was at Edgar's house. And I spent half the day at his house, and he was telling me, his whole history of how he grew up in Roswell, the two stores that his family had, how he had his little pony, and he showed me pictures of his pony, how he was an astronaut, the Roswell crash, how he came back, I guess in 71, and he met with all these old-timers that came out of the woodworks trying to talk to him on a personal nature about what happened in Roswell. And he just went on and on and on. He told me about his somatic experience out in space. And at the end of it all, he says, "Look, Ray, you need to do something about this, and I will help you. Rudy and I discussed it. We will be your members of an advisory board. And I said, well, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing. And he told me the same thing that Rudy said, that, it'll come to you. So that's how Free got started, basically.
Let me ask you this. Why do you, why do you assume that it's E.T.? I mean...
No. I'm just using that as a short acronym.
Right.
But
it's non-human intelligence of some sort.
Correct. It's a non-human intelligent being. Almost everybody associated in our board of directors, including Dr. Mitchell and Rudy Shields, their hypotheses is that it's a multidimensional entity, and it might be even thought-driven, with our own interactions on consciousness. It's a phenomenon so complicated that Edgar has told me many, many times. He says, Ray, we only know one grain of sand in a whole beach of this phenomenon. And then when you add the multiverse, you're going to be having almost an infinite amount of beaches. So anyone that pretends to know, what this phenomenon is all about, they don't have any type of grasp of what they're dealing with.
Well, I can't agree with you more on that. So you download this sort of quantum wheel thing. The next thing you know, Dr. Rudy Shields of Harvard calls you up and says, "Yeah,
at 9:30 in the morning.
I know all about this. We've been working on this too." That's pretty odd coincidence, beyond a coincidence.
That's how my 3 years have been. It's one coincidence after another.
Are you still having experiences?
Oh yes, the last 4 weeks, I've met 4 experiencers, all Cubans. One is a doctor. The other one is a 75-year-old man. This other is this guy that I helped out with some legal advice 3 years ago. I haven't spoken to him in 3 years. And goodness, where's the fourth one? This other Cuban doctor. All experiencers. And again, it's all happened with, a 1 month period. And 2 of them have had their family. One of them has had 3 NDEs, near-death experiences, and then another one, his wife has had a near-death experience and numerous contact with these non-human intelligent beings. And he's had numerous paranormal experiences. That's the Cuban doctor. It's happening very frequently now.
So why do you think it has appeared to you, that it's come into your head, that you've been allowed to see it? Why do you think it's you and a few other people and not everyone?
Well, I can't answer that question. The only thing is that I talk to tons of people, and I'm very open about it. I don't care. I'm very solid in terms of my job. I do a good job. I'm an excellent employee. I'm very secure of who I am. All of my family members have had these experiences, so they can't be going crazy together with me. I've had numerous witnesses that have seen these things. So it's a valid phenomenon, except that humanity is not awakened to this. They just don't know to the large extent that this is happening. All these people I've mentioned over the last 4 weeks, all of them have told no one else.
What do you think the agenda is? That whatever this intelligence is, that it's decided it's time for us to wake up? What's going on?
Well, let me tell you, I can't give you the exact details from our research study. We have basically pretty much the first ever large-scale scientific academic research study that's ever been done, because there's almost nothing that's been published scientifically, academically about this phenomenon. And hopefully Mary and Jon Klimo can go into some of those details. But your prior guest talked about near-death experiences, okay? Our preliminary findings have resulted in Free forming an independent subcommittee to focus at the relationship of NDEs and paranormal and UFO-related contact phenomenon, okay? That's how profound the numbers we got on that relationship, okay? And also healing aspects, okay? Let me just mention there's 3 members of Free that have had healing in their family, okay? And they haven't come out publicly with it. Let me talk about 2 individuals that are good friends of mine that have come out publicly with healings. Chris Bledsoe, who lives in North Carolina, he's publicly gone out that these ETs cured him of Crohn's disease. Reverend Michael Carter, I think he's appeared on Coast to Coast before. He's an ordained minister, has his own congregation. He was healed by the ETs. He had one leg that was twice the size of the other. And this big, tall blue being, I think it was blue, touched him and knocked him out. And when he woke up, his leg was normal. And then, as I said before, there's two members of our prestigious panel of our free board of directors have had healings, but they haven't gone publicly with it. So that's another relationship that we've seen here. And I could go on and on and on, George, with information that we've received from this survey that will rock ufology. Just like the work of David Jacobs and Bob Hopkins and Dr. Mack rocked ufology in that time, the data that we have received from this research study is going to rock what is known as ufology.
Well, you know how those guys were received initially. It was not exactly rolling out the red carpet for them. Ufology can be pretty stodgy at times, and I can imagine how the stuff that you're working on is not going to be well received by everyone.
Sure, but they have to understand who's involved here. We have 5 academics in this group. It's not just little Rey Hernandez or Joe Schmo. This is Dr. Rudy Shields, Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Jon Klimo. We have a neuroscientist, Bob Davis, involved here. Several other PhDs. We have Kathleen Martin, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Mary Rodwell, Giorgio Piacenza. These are highly respected individuals in this field. Also, we have a huge sample that we have already. We've gotten 1,380 individuals in English that have responded to this survey. We've had also the survey running in Spanish, and we just launched in French. So, and we're getting translations in Mandarin and Portuguese, and we're looking for translators in other languages as well. So this is a multinational, multilingual research study headed up by numerous academics, and we have numerous control groups, numerous types of standards that are being applied to this study. It's never been done before. So,
what will you know at the end? What do you hope to know? What's the answer what's the question you hope to have the answer to?
Well, let me respond a certain way. By the end of the survey, we'll have a better understanding of what questions to ask. Because right now, it's very difficult to even know what questions to ask because this phenomenon has been so complicated. It's so complicated because individuals have focused on certain items for so many, many years. They focused on the abduction phenomenon. Now, the data that we've got show that it's much, much more complicated than just purely abduction. Like in my case, okay, we had inside our house, my wife has seen this entity, and she had missing time, and she wasn't there. I didn't. I have no conscious recollection of being abducted, and that's the vast majority of people that have taken these surveys. Okay, they have not been abducted, but yet they've had contact. Okay, so it's a much more complicated phenomenon than what a lot of people think it is. So at the end of it, we hope to get some basic information of what this contact experience is about. Right now, I think we're kind of clueless because we haven't had this type of data before. It's been, for example, Dr. Mack in his 2 books, his first book had 11 experiencers that he interviewed. His second book is not a huge sample, but again, it was a limited amount of people that he basically did comparative interviews on. So we know very little about it. I mean, Kathleen Martin, who's a member of our board, she did a book with Denise Stoner titled Alien Abduction Files. They had 50 individuals that they used, and 25 individuals were a control group. So it's only 50 experiencers. So it's a lot of the previous studies were quite limited in terms of its scope and its range of what questions to ask. Here, we've already asked a total of almost 600 questions. And by the time we're done, we're going to be asking over 1,000 questions. And on top of that, we're going to be doing formal interviews, one-on-one. We're going to have control groups. We're going to have a battery of mental health assessments. So this is the full gambit. At the end of this, we hope to have a comparative, multinational, multilingual assessment of what is going on. And we might not be able to address that question that you asked me, but at least we'll have a better idea of what questions to ask.
Well, I'll tell you, Ray, that the idea of a unified theory of the paranormal is something that I've always been interested in. I don't know if you're familiar with the writing about the ranch in Utah, the Skinwalker Ranch stuff, but it's a place where all of the kinds of phenomena that you're describing all happened in one place, and it was almost as if it's trying to tell us that all this is connected, and now I'm glad to hear that you're studying and looking for that kind of connection. Rey Hernandez of Free, thank you very much. We'll have you back again, I hope, when you got some more information to share with us.
Thank you, George. And just to let you know, each and every one of our board of directors believes that relationship exists.
All right. Well, we're going to hear more about that in just a moment with two of your colleagues from Free. Doobie Brothers take us into the break here on Coast to Coast AM. Powerful, ethereal love song from 1974's Bridge of Sighs album. That's Robin Trower, In This Place. And I thought that song sets the right mood and tone for where we head in the rest of tonight's program. When I had asked Chris Boros, the producer, to help me set up this show tonight with the guests associated with Free, since the organization has extraterrestrial encounters in its title, I kind of figured we would be focusing on abductions, the classic abduction scenario. But after hearing the comments of Rey Hernandez, the guest in the last hour, it's pretty clear that this is much broader, much bigger, and more ambitious than I had imagined. I've spoken many times on this program about the need for research into a possible unified theory of weirdness, if you want to call it that, whether there's a connection between all the topics that we so often discuss on this program, UFOs, ETs, abductions, paranormal, poltergeist, psychic phenomena, whether all of these things lead to the same place. And in fact, that sounds like it is exactly what this organization, Free, is trying to do. When we come back, we'll hear from two of the founding members of Free, Mary Rodwell, who's a counselor, hypnotherapist, author, and founder of and principal of ACERN, the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, and Dr. Jon Klimo, chairman of the Free Experiencer Research Project, a full professor in the clinical program at the San Francisco Bay Area campus of the American Schools of Professional Psychology. Both of them esteemed and respected, and they're going to tell us what they're trying to do. Stay with us. Much more to come. I mentioned a moment ago that both of my guests are well-known and well-respected in their fields. Both of them have been on the program before, so help me in welcoming back Mary Rodwell, who's coming to us live from Australia, and Dr. Jon Klimo. Good to have you both back on the show.
Thank you for having us on.
Mary, I'd like to start with you. Instead of me reading off your resume, why don't you tell me how your road led you to Free?
Well, it starts with the first person that walked into my office and said, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're a loony. And I'm sure many of your listeners know exactly what I'm talking about, because for many people in the public, this is exactly what it sounds like when you describe being taken up onto spacecraft, waking up with marks on your body, shaved areas, for example, dealing with a lot of strange beings, and knowing that this has a reality, but a very scary one for a lot of people, because this is totally denied in publicly. So fortunately, I'd read a couple of books at the time which were a godsend in many ways, because I read the book by Dr. Jon Knapp, who, as we know, was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, who wrote two books on this whole subject, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, and also Passport to the Cosmos. I was very grateful to have read this just prior to my first client walking in the door, because I hadn't heard of this phenomena at all, although I've always been interested. It's strange, weird, and wonderful. I've always found myself very intrigued by the mysteries. And when you work in counseling, as I've done for 30-odd years, people do have unusual experiences, maybe related to grief and loss, where they feel or sense, someone they've loved is close by, or they'll get a sense that they're there. And many people will describe these strange experiences and hope that you don't think they're crazy. So for me, this was a lead-in to another aspect of what we call our multidimensional experience. And we all have them. To deny that as part of our reality, to me, is absurd. When, to just tell us that anything we need to see is in fact has to be solid, touch, feel, and smell it, when we all have intuition, we always have feelings, we all have knowings, and we all have experienced strange senses, when someone's going to, answer the phone. So for me, it's always been an inaccurate paradigm. And when you have someone coming to you that is plainly articulate and intelligent, and it's happening to the whole family, you know full well that this cannot be, some kind of individual fantasy. So for me, the reality it started with that. And from that particular gentleman and helping and supporting his family, I then needed to understand more about what this is about. And I was doing advanced counseling at the time, and I took his case study to supervision. I was very careful to put in all the possible things this might be, including, the fantasy prone, all the lovely chestnuts they throw out about this. And what was fascinating to me was that in that group, supervision group, I had a couple of, social workers, there was clinical psychologists, there was the uniting minister, and instead of saying the gentleman was crazy, they all started to tell me about paranormal happenings that they'd experienced, either haunted houses or sense of spirit. So it was fascinating to me to see that this perhaps wasn't so unusual after all, that in some way or another, we all experience this, but we don't always know how to quantify it or how to articulate it, or we don't feel safe enough to. So when this gentleman came to me and I read, I'd already read a little bit about this, what was fascinating, as we know in this wonderful world that we're all in, that synchronously more and more people found me. And I can't always explain that, but all I know was that from the start, 1 year of one person to 2 weeks later, another person walking through the door. And it's led to 3,000 cases so far, globally.
Wow.
All walks of life, lawyers, doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, right through to policemen, airmen, politicians, all saying similar things about this experience. And what they're also saying, and this is where, I'm so excited about Free, because with my organization, I haven't the resources, and much as I've wanted them, to provide help if someone feels they have implants, for example, or if they've, got strange photographs of anomalous lights. I'm not an expert in those areas. When they find themselves doing, strange scripts or strange artwork as part of their experience, for example, I desperately have sought, medical help with those that may have implants and they've been seen on X-ray but dismissed by their general GP, or felt that some illness or even a miraculous healing has happened, and they've got no way of quantifying it in a way that we could utilize that as part of the research. So this is what, Free has become so exciting for me, because here we're getting together and understanding this is really about human consciousness. This isn't, the nuts and bolts side of ufology has been extremely important. We've needed the photographs and the sightings and the implanted objects and the marks and scars and the whistleblower testimony and all these other things that come in with the nuts and bolts of ufology. But we've really struggled to quantify that other aspect of human multidimensional experience. And that covers all the things that I'm sure Ray mentioned, like out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, time distortions, healing and healing abilities, altered and enhanced senses, downloads, information downloads such as complex physics that even children mention to me. They talk about being given information on the craft to do with black holes and high physics, which is incredible when the children are less than 10 years old.
I'll tell you what, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that, sort of the broad spectrum. I want to give a chance for Dr. Jon Klimo to get involved in this. John, I look at your academic credentials, the places where you work, the papers you've written, and things that you've done, and then at the bottom of the paragraph, it talks about things like paranormal consciousness studies, spiritual transpersonal studies, ufology. Those things don't always go together in an academic resume. It just seems to me that your road to working with Free must have been fraught with peril from a professional standpoint.
Fraught with peril, yeah. Well, challenging. Well, it's a pleasure listening to Mary. I used to think many of us separately thought we were alone in all this. Nobody. We were kind of martyrs to the cause of these things, and had few people could understand or talk to us or support us. and then I started later in my life to get involved with organizations of like-minded people, and finding, like listening to Mary here, or Ray or others, that my God, we're all birds of a feather, and we're all pulling together. It's not the old Piscean loner model. It's more of an Aquarian conjoint, pooled effort and heart. And that's what it really, as a kind of shy introvert that I've been, it's very heartening to see that going on. And so, yeah, I chose an interesting path. I chose academia. I mean, it was my day job. It's not my calling. I began as a poet and an artist, and I couldn't figure out where the creativity, the inspiration, the kind of overshadowing of some larger something that would work through me as a creative person. That was the great mystery, and I was the case of it. I was trying to examine my own navel and understand that, and that led me eventually, during the 40 years of academia, of getting involved with trying to help understand and explain the phenomenon of channeling. And I'm considered, false humility aside, kind of the general authority on it, based upon the book I wrote on it and other things, because I was what I was talking about. And in the free organization, many people in it, working with it and running it, are the case of what their organization is about. They are experiencers of a larger reality, whether it's otherworldly and extraterrestrial, or other kinds of larger reality kinds of things. And so, yeah, I've chosen to, consciously and unconsciously, take the route within the belly of the beast of mainstream science and higher education, and to try to be making a case as an ombudsperson or as an advocate of this larger reality, and to try to find legitimacy, not find it, I knew was the case, but to help raise consciousness for the legitimacy and the authenticity and the credibility of these claims of a larger reality, a larger experience than most people hear about in the media, which is sort of controlled consciously and unconsciously, and we only kind of hear it as we're synchronistically blown together to compare notes about this lifetime. And one of the secrets that's coming out is many of us, a majority of human beings, certainly in the United States, have had a non-ordinary experiences, and it's coming out now more and more. And within what Mary was saying, what I wanted to pick up on was I've spent my whole life trying to develop what I would call a unified field theory of the nature of reality, for heaven's sakes, including spirit and consciousness, not just material reality, but also a unified field theory about the very things that you were talking about, George, and that Mary's talking about, which is not just ufology and extraterrestriology, but adjacent, non-ordinary, anomalous kinds of experiences and beliefs and abilities. And so there is a deeper structure to all of this, which I've been writing about and teaching about. I can't teach about all of it within academia, within the university base, because that's where not the bad guys, I almost said bad guys, where the loyal opposition resides. And the loyal opposition has been in charge of science, and has been in charge of, in a different, softer way, the media and the control rods on the consensus reality. You know, I'm not saying it's a conscious mind control, but I mean, I think it was Noam Chomsky, the linguist, said manufactured consent. That there's a kind of a engineering of group consciousness that's happening on a number of different levels. The interesting thing is that can play into the extraterrestrial perspective as well, because we know for a fact, not for a fact, my skeptics would say there's no fact, you're just full of it, but that there's when you move into abductee and contactee reports and experiences, they're fraught with the very stuff that I, as a parapsychologist studies, like telepathy. Almost automatically, there's a telepathic connection interspecies with us and other beings. and also they seem to have a different kind of technology and a greater technology. But there's also not just a high-tech part of it, so to speak. There's a high-touch part. I mean, I'm not going to talk about there's negative and there's positive sides of these beings, not of each being, but different kinds of civilizations of them, and there is. It's important that we learn our own capacities with our own psyches and our own mental potential, as well as our spiritual potential, if we're going to not get co-opted as we move into the cosmic neighborhood and see how our neighbors, some of them might want to kind of treat us just the same way as people here on Earth treat each other, to try to be takeover artists or to subjugate and to control. And we need to be free. We need to be a free species in the galactic system. And certain kinds of the interlopers into our dimension and into our planet, in our lifetime, certainly, have been are troubling because they have their own agendas, and we're at the mercy of them because we've been so shut down, and our science has been so negating of the potentiality of a human being that many of us know is very, very real. I'm not talking about the UFO stuff. I'm talking about the extrasensory perception and the psychokinesis and the capacity to move in and out of the body and to alter consciousness at will and to mind over matter and all kinds of things like that. That if you study the reports from abductees and especially contactees and conscious experiencers, you find an immense array of capacities on the part of extraterrestrials that we have been denying of ourselves, and there's been a kind of a conspiracy to keep us from knowing we have these capacities. I just want the truth to be able to set us free as a species, a human species, that we have these capacities so we can hold our own a little better and walk collegially with at least the positive ETs that have been connecting to us.
Well, since you guys have extraterrestrial encounters in the title, the acronym FREE, Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. So I kind of was under the impression we're going to talk about classic extraterrestrial type of reports, gray aliens with big eyes, and that's really not what it is. I mean, as you mentioned, ufology was my path into this stuff. Yeah. But that was just a tiny little slice of it, and I've also always had sort of an intrinsic feeling that there's something much bigger at work here. And then I started working with NDEs, studying the ranch there in Utah, where it was a whole smorgasbord, a Disneyland of the paranormal. It's poltergeists, it's ETs, it's classic flying saucers, it's a whole range of stuff. And it was almost as if the phenomena was trying to say it's all related.
That's true. And I can tell you from my experience with FREE, I mean, mostly are at a distance out of body with regard to experiencing each other. We don't all get together yet. But most of the expertise within FREE thus far is primarily the more old-fashioned ufology, extraterrestriology, right, abductee, contactee, conscious experiencer type, where people almost the entree card to involvement in this has turned out to be, by self-selection and otherwise, has been you are the case of it. You know it in your blood. You know it firsthand. You've been born again into it. You had personal experience with it. You don't just choose to believe it. And so, but that's more what you were talking about, George, how you got involved with it, which is the reports, the reports of what constitutes the literature of ufology and extraterrestriology. And I'm saying that's what started off the FREE organization that Ray helped get together with Mary and a core of others, because they felt, and we still feel, that it needs a really thorough, professional, respectable job needs to be done of carefully studying these things and gaining the respect and credibility of the larger scientific and academic community, so that we have more clout to get past people's disbelief and people's stereotypes and so on about these things. You're crazy, you're loony,
yeah.
Woo-woos. And so that's at the heart of the FREE is that. But what I've seen happening since I was asked to become involved with it by Ray was they're seeing what I've known for decades.
It seems like it's telling us that all of these roads lead to the same place. What that place is, that's pretty tough to decide. Foghat from 1978 is telling us we're going to take a break. When we come back, we continue our conversation with Mary Rodwell and Dr. Jon Klimo about the focus of free in this amazing research project they've just undertaken. Stay with us. That's Wings from the Venus and Mars album 1975, exploring the thin line between love and obsession. Pretty good song. We're talking with Mary Rodwell and Dr. Jon Klimo about FREE, this amazing organization that has just launched a pretty ambitious research project to look for links, explanations, answers that sort of connect a lot of things that we would classify as paranormal, but which maybe science in the end can, in fact, explain. When we come back, we'll ask our guests about the nature of that research project, how they set it up, what they hope to explain and answer. Much more to come here on Coast to Coast AM. In the last hour, if you were listening, you heard experiencer Rey Hernandez tell this story about an email he had sent to Mary Rodwell. He sent it 7 months before it actually arrived, and it arrived on a key day for him, a day that he had a remarkable paranormal type experience. Mary, do you remember that event? Is that the way it went down?
It was quite hilarious, and it seems to be very much part of the unusual kinds of experiences that happen and the synchronicities. And yes, it's exactly that way, and it was fascinating because for Ray it was so significant because of this huge understanding that he had that something needed to be set up that was, to hopefully change the way that we approach this whole phenomena.
And for it to happen that way, it was almost like somebody sent you a greeting card, almost a printed invitation, that it was a manipulation, a way to lasso you and get you involved in this.
Oh, look, I've seen over the last 20 years since I've been involved in this, I'm pretty certain there's another level of organization going on that I'm not aware of and Ray's not aware of. And we often have chuckles about the mere fact that there are a lot of synchronicities in the way that, Dr. Rudy Shield came on board and then Dr. Greg Mitchell. And, of course, I was really thrilled that Dr. Klimo came on board, because I remember reading his book on channeling about 25 years ago and never in a million years thought we'd be blessed enough to have this wonderful gentleman help with this new vision, which to me is forever growing, which is also, for me, a real bridge between the old paradigm and the new.
Let me throw a great big lob, a big old softball over the middle of the plate, and you can both take a whack at it. But it's the central question is the nature of what we're dealing with here. I mean, we're talking about spokes on a wheel and how they all fit together. I wonder if the two of you have preconceptions about how it all fits together. We've got, is it ETs? Is it ultra-terrestrials? Are we interdimensionals we're dealing with? Are they gods or demons? Do we have any idea? Or do we not even know enough information yet to answer the question? Ask the question. Mary, we'll start with you and then John.
I think it's all of that. And probably visitors from our future as well, because what seems to come through with all the patterns of experience, because I think now what we've all discovered is that the range of human experiences with contact is so broad that you can't put it into little boxes anymore. You have to look, for me, it's been about patterns of experience and seeing where they correlate. And it's all part of this interdimensional, multidimensional ability we all have to interact with the matrix, if you like, or the hologram. I've often tried to explain to those that are coming in from a more metaphysical, spiritual perspective, when they talk about their spirit guides or they talk about spirits or all these other beings that they see, and I'm saying, well, it really just often is the lens that or that your belief system that you're looking through, because for one person an angel, for another it might be a light being, depending on the way that you interpret it in your belief system. So I believe it's all in the mix, and probably a lot more as well that we don't understand.
John, I mentioned before about the ranch and how the sort of the only thing we learn from all the weird stuff that happened on that ranch is that it seemed to be trying to tell us that there is a connection, that all this stuff is related somehow, but we can't figure out what the connection is. Do you think that there's an intelligence that seems to be wanting us to know or wanting us to ask questions and follow this path?
Yes, it certainly is. By the way, you mentioned the ranch and Ned's. I was invited to a retreat a few years ago by Robert Bigelow and the NDEs organization up in the mountains outside of Las Vegas. And it was really an interesting bunch of people, including Raymond Moody, the near-death guy, and a whole who's who of people. And I don't know what I was representing, maybe channeling, but other things as well. And the retreat was because of just to look at survival of physical death. And it wasn't ufology particularly, but an interesting weekend. And Stephen LeBurge, the Lucid Dreamer Authority, was part of it, and many others. And we each had a piece of the puzzle. We represented different anomalies, and I think that I can't speak for Bigelow, but I think he was interested in bringing people together to look for commonalities of this. And I think that the ranch was an attempt to make a kind of a field of dreams. He will build it, and they'll come, and we'll have to come this portal or this trans-earth interconnectedness that'll give us smoking gun evidence of a larger reality. And it helped in certain ways, and it didn't work in certain other ways. But it's the interrelation of all these anomalous things, and for me, I take I use a fancy term, idealism, which is a philosophical term, but it goes back to the Vedic Hindu, Indian, and so on. It just means that everything is essentially consciousness. At the heart, it's a universal consciousness field. Everything is contained within consciousness. Everything resides and takes place within kind of an infinite and eternal interiority. You could say the mind of God. If you don't like God, you could just say the universal being, the universal consciousness field. And I fervently believe in that. I've had experiences with it. And from that perspective, in my channeling book about 1988, I put forth a metaphor that's worked for me ever since, which is that we're like subpersonalities, alters or subpersonalities in a person, usually looked at pathologically, but I want to look at it non-pathologically. We're like subpersonalities, us human beings, us individual human beings. We're like and not just us human beings, but all the extraterrestrials, all levels of entity-like being, embodied, disembodied, human and otherwise. We're all like what I call cosmological subpersonalities of a single being, of a single all-containing, all-creating, all-sustaining being, and we are we live with, and we start off with a presenting problem of, borrowing from psychology, of what I call cosmological dissociation. We are dissociated from each other. Each of us is dissociated from other parts of ourselves within each of us. We're dissociated from each other, and each of us is dissociated with regard to our own creator and our ground of being, God or universal consciousness field or whatever you want to call it. Given that, I look at my fellow, what I call, sibling offspring of our common creator or cosmological subpersonality, others, in the great being, and I look at them. I look at the extraterrestrial ones, and some of them are like the Three Stooges. They'll poke your eye out. They'll take you over. They want to eat your flesh. All that kind of bad Hollywood stuff. And then others they do seem like ascended masters or angels, and they sure as hell have done all the things that parapsychology has only begun to look at, like materialization, dematerialization, and like the stuff that happens close to the borders of death and after death, when you have you're moving between levels of reality, frequency domains, dimensionality, octaves of densities of level, degrees of freedom, kinds of physics, kinds of consciousness. But underneath it all, for me, it's all subsumed by consciousness. What do you say? God's consciousness, our consciousness is within it, like the offspring of it. And so that's, for me, a metaphor that works. And then within that, I can look at things like paranormal and anomalous phenomenon and abilities and claims, and say, well, those are just simply ones that are more outside of the boxes of these different consensus realities, whether they're human or otherwise, physically embodied or otherwise, that where there's an agreed to notion of what's real and what's possible. And here on Earth, we're very, very constrained. We're very somnambulistic in what we think is possible. And part of it is we're being engineered. For me, evil is people who are beings who are consciously doing it, consciously keeping us asleep and lobotomized and self-limited. And that's a sin if you know you're doing it. Most people, I don't think, know they're doing it to themselves and each other. But my hope is that we can wake up now, actually within our lifetimes, and take dominion of our own potentiality to relate to each other, overcoming this dissociation. And anytime I read, and I've got libraries of these things, I just gorge myself and I never get enough. You hear about how dissociation is overcome in varying degrees and ways interspecies in extraterrestrial encounter experiences, as an example, where the ETs seem to have a handle on being able to move beyond the speed of light, being able to move in and out of the constraints of physicality. Time is not even necessarily a constraint, depending on the species we're talking about. And so given that, they're way showers. They're saying these things, it's almost like Christ said, these things you shall do, and other things as well you shall do in your time. You're coming awake into that. That's part of your heritage as sons and daughters of God, if you want to look at it that way, or at least cosmological subpersonalities, if that's more neutral. And so I'm very excited about the fact, after 73 years on this planet, that I'm going to get to see some of these things more of a waking up and feeling less alone and misunderstood, not only by academics and scientists, but by people who are kind of somnambulistically out there, who've been led to believe, because that's just what rains down on them, that this is, don't pay attention to that, that's silly. It's, that kind of subculture that listens to Coast AM in the middle of the night, fruitcakes.
Yeah.
When in truth, that's the lie that is put to our own potentiality. And I think until we get in touch with our own potential as human beings and as sons and daughters of God, or as cosmological subpersonalities, and overcome our dissociation, so we can reach our own higher selves, and so we can link up more synchronistically and telepathically in other ways. Not a hive mentality or a soullessness, but a heartfulness, a heartful one. And I think that's why a lot of ETs get drawn to us, is that they see we have some of the, it's like the different characters that went to Oz. One went to get
the heart and the mind, and the courage. And
I think there are ETs out there. I think many of you who consume the literature of extraterrestriology, some of them don't seem like the little grays, don't seem to have much heart, but they have what parapsychology would call kind of like the hive mentality or group mind or that kind of a thing. And if we could ever reach that potentiality of overcoming our cosmological dissociation as cosmological subpersonalities, or whatever my jargon is, and link up more that way and get in touch with taking dominion in ourselves, we can be a powerful presence in the cosmic neighborhood, rather than kind of a barefoot pregnant down on the farm, shuffling around in the dust dummies who have been also victimized to think that don't pay attention to that stuff. Don't look at the white elephant in the corner there. That's garbage. That's New Age foo-foo. And then when they land on the White House lawn, we're like cattle. We're like Charles Fort said. You're like cattle.
We're property. Yeah, we're property. Mary, let me ask you this. And I promise in the next segment we'll get to free and the study that you guys are working on. But, ufology, it's frustrating to look at these mysteries through that one particular prism, because you look at it and it's been 60 years in the modern era. We're no closer at all to answering any of the big questions: who these visitors are, why they're here, what their interest is in us, where they're from. We don't know answers to any of that stuff, despite all the cases and studies and effort and people that have come and gone from the topic. You've dealt with experiencers, abductees, and not all of their experiences are positive at all. How do you reconcile the negative and invasive things that are reported to you by people you work with compared to the blissfulness of a near-death experience and the changes, the positive changes that are made. I mean, it's hard to figure out an agenda for who these beings are.
It's a good question. And I'd like to say that I don't know, because I didn't hear the first part of the interview with Ray, but we were looking at least 70% of those so far that have done the survey had positive experiences, and that fits in with what I've found with the CERN, that 20-25% of those that come to me have had very fear-based experiences. What the average public does not know is that often that fear is based on the unknown, on, not knowing what was happening and not understanding it. When you take this individual into a place where they can explore it more through hypnosis, many of them will see the procedures or things that had happened to them. They get a greater understanding of what that may be, whether or not it is, some kind of genetic retrieval, or in some cases it's actually healing that has been done, for example. Something that is a very important part of our research in that aspect of encounters. So it's the other thing that I think also is very important here is a lot of the most traumatized are those that have had what we call the MILAB, the military abductions. They're the ones that I have seen as the most traumatized of all. And if I'm working with someone who is very traumatized, I'm never surprised to find there's been some military interference in there. And this is something that many researchers, don't, I think, qualify enough. That the most fear-based are often the human interactions where, you've got these covert agencies picking people up and abducting them, and there's many cases of that. And that is extremely traumatic. That's not to say that there isn't the same with some of the Greys, for example. And what's also important to say about, even the Greys, that I was told by one lady who said there's at least 165 species of Grey. So it's like taking one person off this planet and saying that represents humans. So again, it's lack of information where we're trying to get a sense of what's going on. What I have found the most useful is to look at the outcomes. And if 70% of those surveyed so far, of over 1,300, are saying that it's ended up being positive to them, you've also got to look at what those outcomes are. And the outcomes are very transformative. They become very much more ecologically aware, often wanting more simple rural lifestyles. They're not interested in materialistic values. They become very sensitive to their environment, feel very connected to their environment. Many of them want to be healers or to do positive things for the planet. So the outcomes are really fascinating, and I always think it's a real a pity that we're not looking at this side of the evidence of having encounters, is the way it shifts the perceptions of the individual. They become more telepathic, more empathic. They seem to sense so much more than the rest of us in terms of, seeing energy fields. They may see, strange orbs and things like this, which shows that their multidimensional abilities are enhanced in amazing ways. And this changes their perception of not only the beings, but themselves and what their potential is, which is what Dr. Klimo is talking about. So what I'm seeing is, if you like, an upgrading going on of the human condition, or at least in terms of helping us through going from a very limited paradigm and consensus reality, almost a deprogramming, if you like, of our conditioning, to show that we have abilities far greater than we've ever believed. And not only those with experiences are saying this, and saying that they can even sense and feel when an animal's in pain. Some even say that they can understand and communicate with animals. Now, if you've got the odd person here and there saying that, but I'm actually getting many hundreds are saying, I now can connect more with my environment, with the animals, and I feel and sense people's emotions. Now, to me, that is a positive thing, because the more we connect to one another, the more we can be loving beings, if you like, rather than if we disagree with someone, we shoot them, which is unfortunately what seems to be happening on this planet at the moment. So I see the results of encounters overall as a transformative event, even if some of those experiences have been very traumatic or difficult for some. Many of them say it was because they didn't understand what was going on. And often through hypnosis, and I've worked with many hundreds in hypnosis, the subconscious, the the tape that records everything without editing, will come up with some amazing understanding that,
right.
For some people is difficult to at first to resonate to, but in the end makes a lot of sense to them.
Okay. Mary Rodwell, Jon Klimo of Free. When we come back, want to hear about the study itself, how it's designed, what it's designed to find out. We'll open up the phone lines with your questions or comments as well. Maybe a couple of you have your own experiences to share with us. We go into the break with canned heat. Let's work together, appropriately enough. Much more to come. The Beatles, Sun King. I figured, well, the sun's coming up for some of the listeners in various time zones. I'll tell you, in all the history of popular music, there's nothing quite like the second side of that Abbey Road album, where one song after another sort of morphs seamlessly into the next. Lush harmonies. That's a great song and a great album. We're talking with Jon Klimo and Mary Rodwell about the organization FREE, Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. We'll hear a little bit about their study and what they're trying to accomplish, and then open up the phone lines. You're welcome to ask anything you want or make any comment. I hope you go beyond just saying you saw a UFO somewhere. Give them your good stuff. Show them what we're all about here on Coast to Coast. We'll be back with more in just a moment. There's so much that we don't know. I can imagine it was so challenging for FREE to come up with some sort of an instrument, I guess you'd call it, to launch this study. These visitors, if they're visitors, maybe they live here, maybe we're the visitors. We know that they appear to us in different shapes and different sizes. They can disguise what they look like. They can assume other shapes. They morph into different things. We don't really know what they look like or where they're from or what their agenda is. I suspect that maybe in hearing from the two of you tonight that it's multiple intelligences out there, maybe with multiple agendas, not all of them friendly. I guess the ultimate answer or the ultimate happy ending in this is that we would at least be able to ask the right questions. Jon, you are intricately involved with designing I'm using air quotes around it, the instrument, this study, a questionnaire. Tell me, what is the happy ending? What? Hello?
Yeah.
What would be the happy ending, the result that you'd like to get from what you've undertaken?
Well, we'd like to be able to turn from our own study and from the participants in our own study and the data derived from them, turn to the larger population and say, including the privileged part of it, the higher education, the scientific community, the power structure that turns out degrees and empowers people to be taken seriously and be authorities. And right now, most of the people who listen to this program and are on it are outsiders. They're disenfranchised from that. So one thing we hope to do by this study, and others like it, is to show how many we got, something like 1,300 people in the first phase we've worked with already. That gets to be a significant N, and they say in research circles, the number of people that your data is based on. And if we get enough people and we ask them the same questions, at least in the first phases of what we're doing, the quantitative component, and I'll get to that in a second, you can then generalize. You can make the pieces of the wedges in the pie and show this many percentage and this many percentage and this many percentage of the overall 1,300, and it may end up being 13,000. Your own listeners may become involved. And it increases it in effectiveness, making a case for. And that is that how do you keep dismissing thousands and hundreds and thousands and maybe eventually a lot more than that? It could really in our Facebook times and all that, we could exponentially grow this thing till finally all the people are trying to keep a lid on this stuff and keep control over it. The control freaks and the people that want to keep a certain power in the mystification of it and not letting the larger population know the truth of things, including the truth of themselves and their own potential, let alone the truth of the cover-up stuff about the ufology. That if you could see in studies like this that we're working on, that my God, there's thousands of people, we certainly got many, many hundreds now, but it could move to thousands if we open it up to your own listeners, for example, that they can't all be crazy. And look at, they hold day jobs, and they have families, and they're nice people. They're not, they're not crazy. Remember, Mary is a clinician, and I'm an academic a research psychologist that trains clinical psychologists, for God's sakes, and I empower them that they become doctors and get PhDs in this stuff. We know what we're talking about, and nobody's going to be able to disempower me by saying I'm a nutcase dealing with nutcases. That's such a absurd, simplistic way to handle it. So,
John, do you think in the end that it's most people have experiences, whether they know it or not, that most of us, or even all of us?
Most people have had anomalous and paranormal experiences of various shapes, sizes, and degrees. Whether it is what we would call extraterrestrial or just otherworldly, that's a smaller percentage in that case. Although if you wanted to really hypnotize people or really lie them down on the old couch and get them relaxed and talk about this more and get them put quality of attention focused on it, you might find a surprisingly larger percentage. But the purpose of this instrument, we're calling it here, multi-phase instrument, is to finally have some hard data with a large enough N, a large enough number of participants, that we can say, begin to generalize that this percentage of the population of people claiming or saying, yes, I've had that kind of experience, are saying they're little grays, or they're reptilian, or they're angelic, or it was positive, or it was negative, or they gave me scientific information. And if you ask me more questions, I'll tell you what kind of information. We just want to manage this stuff and grow it like agriculture. We want to grow the data till it can. It's like they said in the Godfather. It's something you can't refuse anymore. And it finally elbows out of the way the fellow human beings that are trying to keep control and a lid on things, and they think it's for our own good and all that stuff. But I think it's not evil; it's a form of evil. But one way to come back at it is with data and evidence and science. And right now we're looking at just being able to mass enough people together where they say, like a Greek chorus, "I've had this kind of experience." And after a while, you can't say, well, geez, they must all be delusional. They must all be hallucinating. It's all just wishful thinking or fantasy proneness. Some of it could be. It's true for all of us. But by God, there is something happening. The elephant is in the room, boys and girls. And then other people come forth. They have the courage to come forth and say, I heard your show, or this and that and that. And I've now been given an opportunity to take that test too, or to do these questionnaires or whatever they are, and to join the club. Because people have been so left out of things who have had experiences.
So, Mary, are you actively soliciting, for example, our listeners? You want people who've had anomalous experiences to go ahead, contact free, and take the test?
I'd encourage anyone, even if they're not absolutely certain whether it's relevant to them or not, because one of the things that I've discovered is a lot of people don't even know what the indicators are. They may have had a few things happen in their life and have never really worked them out. But one of the things that I do, if someone's seen a UFO or they've written to me because of something else that I've put out there, I always send them a questionnaire of my own. Although, that is for my CERN side, because what I'm really asking them to do is to explore their own experience, not to prove anything to anyone, but to come to, if you like, to use that as a tool for themselves to maybe understand things they've never understood. But what's wonderful about the work that we've put into these particular questionnaires has been a lot of input from some very talented and experiences themselves and researchers, that really what we're trying to do is make them as open-ended as possible to just get a sense of just how broad and how vast this actually is. And as Dr. Klimo says, and I actually concur, I think this is far bigger than any of us perhaps have ever realized. And the only way we're going to find out is if we get people brave enough to put their own experiences into this kind of questionnaire. I mean, we're not asking for identities. It's the information that we're seeking, the patterns of experience that will help us to understand this from this broader perspective.
Before the end of the program, I'd like to have both of you tell me in sort of a succinct terms whether you think there's someone who knows, or at least knows more than we do. If there's somebody, government, think tank in some capacity, who has looked at big picture stuff and has at least some kind of a handle on it. But there's so many people on the phones that I think we better take a couple of calls. But I promise you we'll get to that question sometime before the end of the program. I'm going to start with a wild card line. Gary in Ontario. Hi, Gary. You're on with Jon Klimo and Mary Rodwell. What's on your mind? Hi.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I've called in before, and I've tried to get a message across to you and George and Mary both, and I feel like I've been ignored. It's about two books that I've read that nobody seems to know anything about. One is called Bringers of the Dawn, Bringers, B-R-I-N-G-E-R-S, of the Dawn, D-A-W-N, by Barbara Marciniak, and
right.
She's a channeler.
Yep.
And maybe John or Mary knows her.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's part of the channeling literature. I mean,
Yes.
I spend a lot of my time in the whole channeling domain, and I see channeling is a way to get larger and transcending information into our box, into our local egos and consensus reality about larger reality and other beings, from the other beings from the horse's mouth of them, and very often when they're the entities being channeled. Yes, I'd love to help connect the dots for people about the relationship with the channeling literature, the UFO literature, the parapsychological literature, the consciousness studies literature, the transpersonal spiritual literature. They are all deeply interknit, and it has to do with our species waking up, even in our lifetime. It's the pace is quickening, waking up to a larger truth that's not always been kept from us. We've kept it from ourselves. The timing has been off, but it's now out. It's out of control in a positive sense, I think. So yes, I know the book you're talking about, and for people who know about ufology but don't know about channeling, or people who know about parapsychology but don't know about extraterrestriology, until these components come together and pool their information, they're operating with a hand tied behind their back separately, confronting the larger reality, the day-to-day reality, saying, well, you're both crazy. You know, it builds up that critical mass that no, there's something that's bigger than your naysaying and your skepticism and your denying, and there's something even bigger than the true believer of only one of these anomalous domains. There's something that transcends that. And if you know, what's it all about? It's about that we are waking up. And in consciousness literature, what alters consciousness away from a stuck or a homeostatic sidewaysness to consciousness, you can't bootstrap yourself out of that consciousness until it's destabilized or de-automatized. You got to get hit upside the head. You have to have an anomalous experience that you can't figure out that pulls you up short in your day-to-day habitual goings on, and you say, "What the?" It gets your attention. Sometimes something has to be so non-ordinary that it wakes you up from the trance, the consensus trance, as my friend Charles Tart calls it, and you're shocked awake by a kind of hypnotic spell you've been under. And so you the caller right now, you know, you're being called by some of the channel literature where there's truth in it, or there's something that's calling to you, and you feel a little bit of an awakening more, perhaps. And everybody on the phone right now, everybody listening right now has versions of that story.
Gary, what's the second book that you had in mind?
Sorry. We the Arcturians. We the Arcturians by Norma J. Milanovich and Cynthia Pawlowski and Betty Rice. Yeah,
We the Arcturians is one of my favorite books because it's full of what you call paraphysics or something, where the Arcturians, through Milanovich, by the way, he was a doctorate holding academic, they tell her about their technology with light and slowing it down in the liquid light and amazing things. So if you know science or interdisciplinary about the scientific three-ring circus of all this stuff, and you read one of these channeling books like We the Arcturians, you see, my God, there's pieces of the puzzle here. There's other angles that's coming in, whether it's metaphorical or literal. It sheds light on and maybe takes further our scientific understanding. So We the Arcturians is one of my favorite books. Years ago in the International UFO Congress, I presented at it a couple of times. One year, Bob Brown, who was running it, asked me to set up a whole day at the UFO Congress on channeling extraterrestrials. And I've been working on a book about that for about a decade now. But hell, come out where I brought together Milanovic, and I didn't bring together Marciniak, but a number of other people. I'm blanking out right now. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Middle of the night, I can't retrieve them. So all day long, the people at the conference, many there for just the nuts and bolts part of ufology and so on, were hearing this other angle about the otherworldly and our cosmological subpersonalities outside of this Earth domain, it was like a wake-up to them, and it fit in nicely and supplemented what they knew already, or thought they knew. And
okay, Gary, thank you for that call. You finally got an answer about the two books that you've been wondering about for a while. Wildcard line 2, Morris in Atwater, California. Hi, Morris.
Yeah, this is me. Hello?
Howdy.
Hello?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, I'd like to... Well, I've had...
Hello? Morris just dropped. Sorry about that. We're going to try east of the Rockies. Aaron in Wisconsin. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, guys. What do you want to hear about, the near-death experience or the close encounter?
Maybe near-death would be add variety to the...
Yeah, let's go with near-death.
Okay. I was thrown off the back of a speeding vehicle, and before I broke my neck or had the brain injury or the broken back, they pulled me out of my body, took me to the other side where I was in a room. I call it the healing place. And I met my deceased son and my angel. And it looked like my angel was fixing me, like my neck injury, my spinal cord injury, so that I could walk. And then my son showed me the accident, and I could watch the accident as many times as I wanted to. And I could see my body being ragdolled over and over. And then he said, "You're going back." And I was kind of disappointed about that. I didn't want to go back. And he said, "We're going to give you some gifts to take with you, but you have to wait 30 years for them." And last month, or actually May of 2015, was the end of the 30-year waiting period. And one of the gifts was laying out of hands healing, and the other one was to become a famous musician. And I'm not a famous musician yet, but I was also told that I'm going to start healing foundations someday. So that's the gist of the NDE.
Well, Aaron, you should probably call these free folks and take the test and hook up with them.
I will.
One of the projects we're interested in also within free is the relationships, the compare and contrast of ufology, extraterrestriology on the one hand, and eyewitness personal experiences from that domain on the one hand, and some of these other non-ordinary domains of experience and belief and claims, like near-death experience, because what's the commonalities? Well, what's the deep structure that subsumes both what a lot of these coast-to-coast shows are about, with ETs, we'll say, and then on the other hand, NDEs. NDEs have to do with transcending normal reality, normal materially based reality, and our normal beliefs about them, and so does being confronted by someone not of this earth, and they destabilize our stucknesses and make us go to the next level and reach an altered state of consciousness from which we may never return. We don't want to return. We're left changed, like Mary was saying earlier. These experiences leave people changed, profoundly changed, and not, they don't go nuts. They get better at being themselves and being more curious. And I think that's happening with you. And when you said, caller, that you're hearing about becoming a musician or a songwriter, whatever it may be. Well, one of the people I got involved with was a guy who was channeling John Lennon. And he was also a musician, a fairly well-known musician. And he was given a piece of the puzzle. And there's kind of we being given these gifts.
So, John, you had a guy who was working with you who was channeling John Lennon. Was he getting songs?
Actually, he was getting some, but he was the old band kind of guy. He was a older guy, and so he really wasn't his music so much. But he was really wise about professionalism. He played trumpet in Miami Beach. All
right, need to stop because Fleetwood Mac is telling us we need to take a break. We'll come back and get to as many of your calls as we can. Stick around. Much more to come here on Coast to Coast AM. An American original, Tom Petty, I Should Have Known It, from the album Mojo, which is underrated but terrific. We're talking with Jon Klimo and Mary Rodwell. The phones are full. We will get to as many of your calls and questions as we can right after this in our final segment of Coast to Coast AM. Mary Rodwell, I want to ask you the question I was intimating about a little bit ago. Do you think that there is someone somewhere who has studied this, either governments, your government, our government, think tank, private industry, someone who's tried to take on the same kinds of challenges that Free is trying to do to try to get a handle on these larger mysteries, whether there's an interconnection or not?
I would think undoubtedly so. And that is what's so frustrating for all of us on the outside of that, is that, a lot of these questions that we have, they've got data on because they've picked up the craft. They've actually connected to the beings, and they also know what's actually going on in terms of the upgrades that are happening on this planet with a lot of the experiences and their children that are different. And they know they have these incredible abilities and have scores for them. And, when you've got a 9-year-old that tells you that he knows this is going on, that there are bases underground and under the ocean, and he's 9 years old, and he said that, what is his problem is that schooling on the surface with the average school cannot help him in the way that those that have these schools underground with these children, where they're aware of their abilities, their telepathic and telekinetic abilities, and all these other, what we would call advanced abilities. He said, unfortunately, in the average school, they will never understand that. And he is aware of that at 9 years old. And the interesting thing is with the children is that they actually have conscious recall, not only of who they are and why they've come to this planet, but where they're from, and the abilities that they have as well. As this 9-year-old told me, that his abilities are like Tesla's, that he was a light physicist from where he came from, and that it's very primitive down here, and the only one that seems to have got anywhere with the physics that he understands was Tesla. So the children are actually bringing in this information, and they understand it, but I also know that the covert governments, without doubt, know this and know so much more, and this is what's so frustrating for researchers like ourselves.
And John, I'll tell you this, I have from multiple sources that I'm not going to tell you who they are, but people who know this kind of thing say that it's beyond just studying UFOs. We know they've got piles of information on UFOs and sightings and radar information, things of that sort, but also that there have been attempts or proposals to study the interconnectedness of a variety of a range of different kind of paranormal activity, and that the people tasked with this have quashed it because religious beliefs, that they suspect that it's demons or something like that. They don't want to open that door. I mean, same question to you. Do you suspect that there is somebody like in the American government who has a handle on it, or at least a better handle than the public?
If we did a kind of a survey like we've done with Free so far with these experiencers, if we did it with your own listeners, which is a very large N base of people, you'd get up the yin-yang conspiracy theories and rumors and everything else about such secret governments, such covert operations and black budget, this and that, and some of them, if you really raise it up more, some of them are human, some of them are not human. There's all kinds of control freaks out there to keep a lid on things or to keep us cattle, like you say. And yet there are more, and the ones that are going to win, the good guys are going to win, are the ones that want to help midwife us into our full spiritual realized selves as sons and daughters of a common creator that includes the reptilians as well as the Africans or whatever, you know. And so, to answer your question, that takes a number of shows, and you've had people on past that would have already answered that question from their own perspective. Yes, there's a lot of people holding pieces of this puzzle, and you could almost divide them into two categories: those that want to let it out, to let the good news out to fellow human beings using large media like Coast to Coast and so on the one hand, and then there's others that want to keep a lid on it, keep it secreted. There's power in that. Plus, whether they think it's demons or the public can't handle it, and you know, they're like children, and they'll just panic in the streets and all that if they knew the larger reality. That's what keeps everything sideways the way it is. And I'd rather I'd rather gamble on fellow human beings, whatever their damn IQ is or their prejudices are. I'd go with them right now than I would with
power freaks.
They vote the right way if you gave them a chance, if they were informed.
All right, let's take a couple calls. First-time caller, Jerry in Los Angeles. A good show to call in on, Jerry. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I've been involved in this for over 60 years. I'm pushing 80, or 81, I should say. Anyway, I have very good contacts above. I love them. They love me. They show me respect. I show them respect. I will tell you of one incident that happened in Griffith Park, August 2002. And I was thinking the night before I went to sleep about Nasara and a few things going on in this world. And anyway, I went to the park early in the morning. We opened at 5 in the morning. I drove up Vermont, and the very first turn to the left, the very first street to the left, I went up the hill to a circle, which you go around the circle and back down the hill again. And I was leaning up against a car facing the east. And there was a lot of traffic down below. For some reason, a lot of traffic in the park that time of the morning. And I was facing the east. Then all of a sudden, I was full awareness, completely aware of everything. The traffic stopped. A shuttle east of me in the air, decloaked, and for a split second, I saw part of it. A beam of light came from them. There was no fear whatsoever. In fact, I was calmer then than I am now. And telepathically, they gave me the answers to some of the things that I wanted to know. And they were there for minutes, not seconds, for minutes. Then when the traffic started coming in again, they cloaked and disappeared. It took several years before I really knew who they were. They were very friendly, obviously. And with Nathan, a Nordic, I bilocate. With Nathan, a Nordic, on the New Jerusalem in conversation with he and Zip. Oh, and by the way, in our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, 40% of our human type species, and 60% are not. And anyway, Zip is not human, but nevertheless, beautiful people. And I was told that day that shuttlecraft in Griffith Park was actually a Syrian craft stationed in Agartha. And they were kind enough to actually give me answers to my questions I had in my mind then. And the contacts I have had, again, go on and on and on.
All right, Jerry, I'm going to get some reaction to what you've shared with us so far. Mary, any kind of initial reaction to what this Jerry just told us?
I'm very happy that he shared that, and it's wonderful that he does. And this is conscious contact. This is exactly what's going on to, I believe, not just thousands, but probably millions of people that never even mention it to anybody because they don't want to be seen as mentally unstable. Conscious contact is happening, and it's happening, so regularly and frequently. As soon as people lose their fear, then, this information comes in, and it comes in through channeling, it comes in through having a knowing or a sensing. And what's fascinating to me is that that's now leading on into the children who have conscious contact as well, that see spirits and see these beings. And they are getting the information, exactly what is happening on this planet and how and their part in it, which to me is what you were asking before, is, what is the sense of what's going on in this planet? And that's what Dr. Klimo is talking about. We are being given a boot up the bum, basically evolutionary-wise, so that we can actually become part of the galactic community. And that means we've got to at first, recognize that they're here and that we're not alone.
Boot up the bum has now become our new slogan on Coast to Coast, so thank you for that. West of the Rockies, Nikki in Seattle. Hi, Nikki. Welcome to the show.
Hi. First of all, I would like to identify myself as not human, but other. I am other.
Okay, what do you mean, other? What do you mean by that?
Other, this is what I am. I am other. I'm not anything that you know. I'm other. That's what I am.
Okay, can you whittle it down a little bit, like meaning you're from somewhere else?
Not human, not from somewhere else, not from heaven or hell. I'm other.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the gist of what I wanted to tell you was a small story about when I was at my friend's house, and the door opened, and about 7 transparent aliens were in the doorway. They wouldn't step into the room, but they were in the doorway, and I was with my friend. I started saying, oh my God, I start freaking out because they're wearing army fatigues, they're transparent. The main one in the front had the head of a pig. They had huge alien weapons, and they all fit in the doorway somehow, Anyway, so my friend tells them to get out and leave her alone. They were there to take me. And they said, this is your one and only favor that you get. Now, I didn't understand this at the time, but they left. And my friend told me that I have to leave and never come back to that place, because the next time they came back for me, he wouldn't be able to stop them. Now, my friend, I thought about it later, he was born in Rodwell on the Army base in New Mexico. And so I figure he had something to do with that. Now, I have seen shadow people. Okay, I have seen them animated on the wall as shadows, fighting with each other. They were silent. They were tiny. I can talk to animals. I can make the trees stop moving. I can look at the sun.
Hey, Nikki, I'm going to stop you for a second because you've given us so much to chew on here so far. I want to give enough time to our guest to respond. John, you have to be ready to sort of like be a blank slate and listen to what people say without judging them along the way. That you can't just automatically assume, hey, that sounds ridiculous, I'm not going to listen to it.
Correct. The instrument we've been referring to, which we sort of haven't been talking about, the first 2 phases of it are forced choice questions. They're called. You have to say yes or no, and so you can add them up. You can tally the data and make generalizations with these 600 questions. We've drawn from many other prior studies as well, like the wonderful Leo Sprinkle, kind of legendary in these circles, who made one of the first surveys of this kind. He's in there. He's on our board, too. So we asked those kind of questions, including of the woman who's on the phone right now, and she would take our phase 1 and phase 2 things, and we could add her into the pool of things. But the phase 3 we're now working on is what's called qualitative research, not just yes/no. We ache to go deeper into people's experiences, and we ache to have them have an opportunity to share more of their experience in a more unbridled way, not just the forced choice yes/no. And that's what's called qualitative research. And that's really built upon the notion of something I've been involved with for 40 years in higher education research, which is what's called phenomenological research, where all we're interested in is somebody's experience. What is your experience in as much detail, as much time as it takes? The tape recorder is running. What is your experience of? And here's the woman on the phone right now giving us a little snippet of that experience. And if she went through the first 2 phases, the quantitative phases, and got to the 3rd phase, she wanted to volunteer to do that, we would draw her out more and more about the 7 people in the doorway and the other talking to this and that, and we would get that we just deepen the database. It's called a thick description of people's non-ordinary experiences, and that's so much needed in an organized, managed way to increase our understanding as a species about those of us within the species who are having these kinds of experiences, and the rest of us in the human family we can be brought forth if it sounds familiar enough to us, or we can just learn what we can from it, and that's what we're trying to do with our study. So everybody who's come on the phone tonight in this portion is like a potential partaker of our instrument, in quotes, and the almost 1,500 we've got already sound so much like the people on the phone and the people who are not on the phone who could be on the phone, of the millions that listen to Coast to Coast.
We've got the links to free, and if people want to connect with you guys, you folks, and take the test at some point, we have the links on the Coast to Coast website, and I'm sure a lot of them are already availing themselves of that. Tried to get one more call in. Let's go east of the Rockies. Mike, not there. Let's try Ricardo in Marin County on the wildcard line. Ricardo, are you there?
Oh, yes. Hello, and great good evening to you, George, and John and Mary. You are exactly correct on everything you've said, directly in regard to consciousness and what happens to people to gather the light of reason and promote right thought and correct action through the beings that are helping here. This is a godlike entity, and I've had multiple near-death experiences throughout my life. I've had 6 of them, 2 as a child, 4 as an adult, and in concert with that, I had 2 situations in 1992 and 2010. They were both UFO experiences, and they had to do with, one of them was driving out through Marin County, through the Badlands behind Petaluma toward a beach at a place called Marshall, where they used to have a place there that was called Synanon. There was a lot of UFO activity there. I drove out there one night, woke up at 11:30 at night. I got in my car. I was told to go there, and I didn't make it. I had 5.5 hours of missing time, and I didn't know where I ended up. When I drove out there, I saw a huge light come over several ridges, and then I couldn't remember anything, and I ended up somewhere at 6 a.m. practically, from midnight to 6 a.m. on another area of a freeway 20 miles further out down the road. That was one of them. In 2010, I watched a craft fly over, coming down from the sky as a satellite. There was 3 of them, 3 satellites. One of them came down over the Golden Gate Bridge. A couple from Venezuela I eventually met later who saw the same craft. At 5 in the morning, after seeing that craft, it came directly over my area of the Richmond district in San Francisco. I had 2 objects that came up a fire well and were on a 3rd story. There were giant raccoons that were about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. That was rather bizarre. And at that point, I got a neighbor to look out, and she was rather frightened. She was a young woman who, her name was Laura, and she was outside, and I knocked on her window. I said, "You got to see this." And I just saw a UFO over the Golden Gate Bridge.
Hey, Ricardo, I got to warn you that we got about a minute left in the program.
I'll make it fast. These things happened to me then, and then after that, at 5:50 in the morning, I had a terrible nosebleed for the first time in my life out my right nostril, all over my pillow.
I'll tell you what, you need to contact Free and share some of your other experiences with them. That's a pretty power-packed little adventure you had there. John and Murray, want to make any kind of quick, the music tells us we're out of time. I want to thank you both for being on. I hope a lot of our listeners respond and take your test.
Thank you, George.
Thank you so much, George. It's been a
Thanks.
pleasure.
We'll have you back when you get some more results. Thanks also to my earlier guests, Diane Corcoran and Rey Hernandez, and to my colleagues there at Coast to Coast who've helped us put this program on. I'll be back tomorrow night as well with a look at the power of Big Pharma. So tune in if you get a chance. Good night.